Boa manhã, senhoras e senhores. Dando continuidade ao nosso evento, é com grande prazer que apresentamos a próxima mesa redonda intitulada Repensando o deslocamento urbano frente às catástrofes climáticas. Nessa mesa, teremos a honra de contar com a participação dos seguintes palestrantes: Lauri Lahikainen, da Tempere University, da Finlândia; Rodrigo de Souza Conrradi, do ICLEI, Governos Locais pela Sustentabilidade. A mediação desse painel será conduzida pelo professor Dr. Júlio César Cossio Rodrigues. O professor Lauri Lahikainen é filósofo e pesquisador de pós-doutorado na Universidade de Tempere, na Finlândia. Possui doutorado em filosofia pela Universidade de Tempere, com a tese intitulada Responsabilidade Individual pelas Mudanças Climáticas, uma abordagem estrutural social. Seu trabalho acadêmico abrange áreas como ética, filosofia política, teoria crítica, filosofia ambiental e epistemologia social. Lahikainen também é membro do projeto Unigate, que explora questões de responsabilidade social e sustentabilidade ambiental. Sua pesquisa interdisciplinar investiga como as ações individuais e coletivas se relacionam com a mudança climática e as estruturas sociais mais amplas. Rodrigo de Souza Conrradi possui graduação em Direito pela Universidade Federal do Rio Grande e mestrado em Relações Internacionais pela Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul. Atualmente é coordenador de Relações Internacionais da Prefeitura Municipal de Porto Alegre, tendo experiência na área de ciência política, com ênfase nas relações internacionais, bilaterais e multilaterais, atuando principalmente nos seguintes temas: direito internacional, Mercosul, relações internacionais, organizações internacionais, cooperação internacional descentralizada e gestão de projetos internacionais. Por questões de saúde, infelizmente informamos que a professora doutora Letícia Britto não participará dessa mesa. Como debatedor, o Júlio César Cossio Rodrigues. É professor de Relações Internacionais no Programa de Pós-Graduação em Relações Internacionais e no Departamento de Economia e Relações Internacionais da Universidade Federal de Santa Maria. Diretor adjunto na Secretaria de Apoio Internacional da Reitoria da Universidade Federal de Santa Maria. Diretor de Cooperação Internacional da Associação Brasileira de Ciência Política. Doutor em Ciência Política pela Universidade de Lisboa. Mestre em Ciência Política pela Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul e bacharel em Relações Internacionais pela Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul. Co-coordenador do Grupo de Estudos em Capacidade Estatal, Segurança e Defesa, GCAP. Pesquisador efetivo do Centro de Estudos Internacionais sobre Governo, do Centro de Estudos sobre a União Europeia e do Grupo de Estudos sobre Dinâmica Econômica, Instituições e Desenvolvimento, e do Grupo de Pesquisa sobre Contestação Internacional e Controles Democráticos. Agora, para dar início à palestra, concedo a palavra aos palestrantes.
Bom dia. Hello. Good morning, Professor Lauri. Nice to meet you.
Good morning. Nice to meet you too.
Okay. We make the presentations.
Thanks for.
And now you can make your presentation for us. You have 20 minutes, and after we start the debate and the questions for our audience here. Thank you so much for your presence here.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk in this in your conference. So I come from Finland, the University of Tampere in Finland, and I'm a philosopher by training, as you heard, but I've also worked in lots of multidisciplinary projects. But this presentation will be pretty abstract and philosophical. I'm presenting something that I've been researching on and thinking about in the last couple of years, and so my research has been about responsibility for climate change, and in philosophy there's a lot of discussions about what is responsibility and what is responsibility for climate change, and how do they come together, and what is collective responsibility. But in this one here, I'm interested in responsibility in the sense that who should do something about climate change and why. And just one little detail. I only heard today that the title of the panel was about urban displacements. I had thought it was about urban challenges. So this is reflected in my presentation. But we can talk about the how this might relate to the question of climate displacement at the end. So next slide, please. Okay, so I have had this research project about cities and climate change and collective responsibility, and it was prompted by kind of two things. So on the other hand, there is this widespread discussion about responsibility, both in the public sphere and in various academic disciplines. And cities have also been kind of forerunners in climate action in many ways. Some people even think that everyone now thinks that cities can save the planet. This, of course, has to do with the fact that those collective agents that would be kind of best suited for climate action have been not so good at taking care of the responsibility. So states, basically. But the question is how can cities be responsible for climate change in the sort of moral way that we can praise or blame cities about whether they do something about climate change or not? And I think for answering this question, we have to think philosophically about cities in the sense that what kinds of things are they, and whether it makes sense to praise or blame them or hold them responsible or have normative expectations for them. What does it make sense that we expect cities to be responsible? And of course, the related question is whether people who live in cities have duties regarding climate change because they live in cities, and what does that mean? In my research, I draw on things like climate ethics, discussion on collective responsibility. There's a new burgeoning field in the philosophy called philosophy of the city. But also I looked at interdisciplinary urban studies, and recently I've been working a lot with people from sociology, but that's not all that much reflected in this particular presentation, so I'm afraid. Okay, so the next slide, please. Well, first of all, can we say that cities are responsible for climate change? The first thing that is required for climate change, that there has to be some kind of causal responsibility. So any agent or any being or any kind of thing can be responsible for if they have caused something. And indeed, according to OECD, a few years ago, cities account for more than 70% of global energy-related CO2 emissions and an estimated 50% of global waste, and are home to nearly half of the world's population. So at least in this sense, cities certainly have some responsibility for climate change. And cities can do things. They can decrease their own emissions by having interventions in heating, city planning, and transportations. They can maintain or create carbon sinks. This is I think both Brazil and Finland share one thing that forestry, like cutting down forests, is a big political issue, and some Finnish companies also operate in Brazil, as far as I'm aware. But in Finland, some cities or municipalities, to be more precise, also own a lot of forest, a lot of land, so they can make decisions on what they do about their carbon sinks. And cities can both help or even force, in some cases, other agents to decrease their emissions. Insofar as cities can have some kind of independent legislation and stuff like that, but also through things like urban planning. So in addition to forcing or helping their community, things like nudging. And cities can also kind of innovate. They can do things that other cities can then take up and do. So they can kind of be role models. There are cities that have taken as their kind of strategic, as a kind of their city strategy to be this kind of climate forerunners. So obviously cities are responsible in the philosophy of responsibility. One basic distinction is about that we can have retrospective responsibility. Also, we have responsibility for things that have happened in the past, and we can have prospective responsibility. So we can be responsible about things that will happen in the future. So cities can share some of the blame for climate change, in the sense that they have contributed to the problem, and they can share some of the kind of prospective duties in the sense that here's the problem, that something needs to be done, and that cities are in a position to do something. Not any city, not any one city, of course. Even if New York did everything that it can to mitigate climate change, that wouldn't be enough to save the planet in any ways. But then it doesn't mean that we cannot say that New York City has a special responsibility as a big city that has a lot of emissions, but that also has many kinds of ways to influence others. Okay, next slide, please. So when is someone responsible, in the sense that, in the sort of moral sense, that we can praise or blame them or have normative expectations for them, so that we can expect them to do something because they should do it, or because it's right or just, or that we can expect that they shouldn't do it because it's wrong or evil. Those kinds of agents can have moral responsibility. And in moral, in ethics and political philosophy, there's been a huge discussion about global responsibility during the last couple of decades, where it's not exactly a consensus, but a lot of people, almost everyone who writes about collective responsibility agrees about these things, that at least this kind of agent can have moral responsibility. that the agent is capable of intentional action, and they have freedom in the sense that they are not completely determined by something or someone else. So they have kind of a free will, of course, to an extent, because we all are. No one is completely free, because we are all dependent on other people and about infrastructures, about the sort of social environment that we live in. But free in the sense that having options to do different things and being able to think about whether to do this one thing or this other thing and so on. And then a collective agent can be morally responsible if they have some kind of decision-making procedure, so that they are organized in such a way that the collective can make decisions. So, for example, the collective that is now formed in this situation. So I am here. At the moment, I don't see any of you. I'm not sure how many of you are there, but there are some kind there. That doesn't mean that there is no decision-making procedure at all, because we have ways of communication. There's this comment thing, and then we don't have rules like an organization or a city council would have, or anything like that. But there are some kind of social conventions, as we share a language. So I think even this collective has a kind of minimal decision-making procedure, in the sense that we are able to maybe talk about something and come to a decision in one way or another. And another important thing is that a collective can be morally responsible if it can take into account moral reasons in its decision-making procedure. So moral reasons like something is harmful to someone. So climate change causes deaths, destruction, displacement, extinctions, and so on. So and we think that those things shouldn't happen. So that's a sort of moral reason that can be taken into account. Okay, next slide, please. So what are cities like? So cities that have a kind of organization. So of course, there are different kind of cities, and now I must acknowledge that I'm speaking from a position of certain kind of privilege and from a certain perspective, in the sense that Finnish cities are reasonably organized. I understand that there are many kinds of cities in the world, and this is not supposed to say that what I say in any case has to do with all kinds of cities. It's more like a sort of, here is a kind of one way to think about cities, and it may not fit all the cities, it may not even fit the most important cities, but it's a way that I think about cities that I am familiar with, and then other people will have to think about the cities that they are familiar with in their own way. But in the sort of cities that I have lived in and that I have researched, they have sort of organizations in which they make sort of plans for the future. They make roadmaps, strategies, and budgets, and so on. So there is a collective intentional action, in the sense that there are documents that are proof that there is intentional action going on there. You could say that city strategy is a kind of collective intention in a way. So how free are cities? Well, obviously there are more powerful agents like the state. Cities are conditioned by many powerful forces like global capitalism, history of colonialism, and so on. So there's the age-old problem of structure and agency. But I can't go into the sort of deep questions about that. But it's just that okay, cities seem to be have freedom to act to the extent that all kinds of agents have. So all kinds of agents, whether they are individuals or states or universities or hobby groups or families, are conditioned by their environment. So cities are not a special case in that sense. And there are decision-making procedures because cities have and organizations for making decisions. Where cities have councils, they have sort of bureaucracy. There are votes, mayors. There are less formal structures. And in Tampere, the city council meetings are filmed. And I've watched some of those. They are often pretty frustrating to watch because, well, local politics can be pretty weird and frustrating at times. But I see moral reasons being discussed in there. So it seems that it is possible to discuss moral reasons in city council meetings and in other places of the sort of decision-making procedure by the city. So, okay, next slide, please. So can cities be responsible for climate change in the sense that they have causal responsibility and capacity to act and the sort of decision-making procedures and so on? So it seems that yes, they can, that we have reasons to expect cities to act morally in the face of climate catastrophes. Next slide, please. So I'm sorry, I wasn't still finished, but I think one thing is that that would be a kind of a very straightforward way to put the issue, and it wouldn't exactly be wrong. That was something that like a pretty basic analytic philosophy about responsibility would be something like that. So here is an abstract enough description about cities. They have, or at least they may have, a city council. They may have certain powers of legislation and planning, and they can have certain kind of causal influence, and they can take moral reasons account. So okay, they can be responsible agents in the face of climate catastrophes in a moral sense. But then there are really different ways to think about cities. So, and we can say that cities are, when we think about a city, we may think about, especially if you are involved in local politics, then you may be thinking about the city as a kind of an organization. But if you're just a common citizen, if you are just someone who lives in a city, or if you're a tourist, or if you are, say, a climate refugee or another kind of refugee in a strange city, then the experience of the city would be very different. So these two philosophers, Bell and Avner Shalit, have this book about the spirit of the city. So I'm not sure if I agree with much about the book, but it's an interesting read anyway, where they discuss whether there's something like the spirit of the city. So whether there's something that people associate with cities like Oxford as a big city of learning, or Washington as a city of politics. And I think there's something to the idea, but I think the interesting thing, just to take their book as a kind of as an example about thinking about cities, they don't pay much or at all attention to how the cities are organized in a formal sense, what their formal decision-making structures are like. Their work is more like the sort of phenomenology of experiencing a city, and whether there is something that is the sort of essence of it. And I think some people who live in cities might even say that they love their city not because of, but despite of the city organization. That's not exactly, or at least, well, that might be. I'm not sure how common, but at least a plausible experience for some people. Next slide, please. And indeed, if if you contrast philosophical literature on collective agency, collective responsibility, collective intentions, things like that, with urban studies or different fields from social sciences and cultural studies and humanities that are taught about cities. Then we have very different kinds of definitions, like Weber famously said that many definitions of the city have only one element in common, namely that the city consists simply of a collection of one or more separate dwellings, but is a relatively closed settlement. That's a pretty broad definition, and I think there are many. You could find many counterexamples about things that are collections of dwellings, but are definitely not cities. But that would seem to be a common feature of cities. Then Andrew Light has a pretty different kind of definition that is sort of is kind of like what Bell and Shalit call the spirit of the city. So Andrew Light says that cities are physical manifestations of our values and priorities. So kind of an idealistic but an interesting case. Anyway, then there's Whitehurst says that cities are spatial manifestation of the complex economic and political process, including property markets, global financial flows, coalitions of political interest, gentrification, labor migrations that shape and condition the urban experience in different cities. So just a couple of examples, and I think I have one example in the next slide. So next slide, please. So here is a philosopher Shane Epting say that the identity of a city is all of the parts that the city has at any given time and how those parts fit and work together, bearing in mind that the parts continuously change, considering that a city continuously changes its composition through time, through adding or subtracting parts, describing its composition as dynamics is fitting. So here's kind of city as a dynamic process made of parts that work together. Epting doesn't mention it in this quote, but it's elsewhere. He calls his approach to cities as applied Mariology. Mariology is a pretty obscure and difficult field in philosophical metaphysics, but lately it's been taken as a kind of applied way to think about complex things that it's and writings about Mariology tend to be pretty difficult, but in its most kind of basic ways, it's just about parts and wholes. So if you look at everything in terms of how it is made up of different parts, and how our then understanding of it changes if we think about it Mariologically, then that might not be something that someone who's doing really hardcore metaphysics would like, but it's something that I think is a useful thought experiment for thinking about something like issues in social and political philosophy. But anyway, these quotes about cities just show that people who have thought about cities really hard do not pay all that much attention about how the city is organized, or what philosophers of collective responsibility like Stephanie Collins or Joel Feinberg would call it this decision-making procedure. So next slide, please. So you could say that we have sort of two cities kind of problem, that there is a city as a kind of process, as a dynamic processual entity, which includes things like dwellings, but a lot of different things as well. And then we have the formal city organization. And can we say that it's just the city organization that has to blame? And I think that would not be wrong. It makes sense to say that the municipal organization of Tampere has a certain responsibility regarding or in the face of climate catastrophes, whether we're talking about climate change mitigation or adaptation or acting in a just and fair and hospitable manner when people are around the world are suffering from climate impacts. But this is something I'm not happy with that kind of solution. I want to think about responsibility and cities in a more complex way. And the next slide, please. So my sort of idea is to kind of follow Shane Epting's idea about taking a look at cities kind of mereologically. So thinking about in terms of parts and wholes, and in a way that sees cities in a kind of rich and complex way. So there's then the parts that make up the city are of course the formal organization, but you can also have social movements. You can have like neighborhoods, schools, cultural activities, and there are non-human elements like the infrastructure, maybe even animals and ecosystems within the city. And we can see how all those make up, how all these parts of the city can take part in the decision-making procedure, whether in the formal, in the less formal sense. And they make a difference in the decision-making, and they include but also they include points of intervention for city dwellers who want to have a say or otherwise affect what the city does. And I'm here kind of thinking about the sort of list about kind of an expanded list that here is the kind of formal decision-making procedure with councils and bureaucracy and things like that, and then adding more items to the list, but more thinking in a way, in a sort of open, or cultivating a sort of open attitude towards decision-making, in the sense that it might be something else than we in collective, the decision-making of the city as a kind of collective agent might be more complex than inclusive than we would think if we just look at the formal organization. So next slide, please. So why should we have this kind of expanded version? Well, one thing is that we can retain the intuition that collective moral agents require a morally informed decision-making capacity. So we can still think about cities because if we said that cities are kind of dynamic processes of different things, really complex, like flows of information and flows of rivers and bridges and buses and traffic lights and so on, and it's all just a really complex process, then we wouldn't have a moral agent at all, because that kind of a process wouldn't make decisions. But also it would be kind of, but if you think about how there's the kind of formal decision-making procedure, but how the decision-making is actually more complex and includes parts of the city that are not part of the formal organization, then we can sort of think about not just the organization, but the city as a whole as a kind of a moral agent that we can have some normative expectations about. This also means that we can think about, it's more, what I'm proposing is more open to interdisciplinary research, because then we can be better informed by social scientific research from urban studies, and that there would be more kind of avenues for interdisciplinary research between environmental ethicists and social scientists and social ontologists and others who like to think about climate change and responsibility and cities, and how we can sort of find more common language. I'm not saying that we should kind of maybe even think about cities in the terms that I've exactly said here. This is more of that this is how someone coming from analytic philosophy or analytic ethics and then looking at like cities, and then looking at studies from urban studies, and then thinking about my own experience as someone who lives in a city and has visited cities and who thinks that cities are interesting and important, could think about myself as part of one collective moral agent called Tempere. Next slide, please. And I think there are some more kind of implications. So would also make, I think, says important to actually understand decision making as that even in the sort of formal decision making of the city, there's lots of informal decision making going on, and the process is much more complex than it usually is. And if we think about it in this sort of expansionist and inclusive way, then we can also see that on the other hand there are points of intervention for, say, climate activists who live in cities, but also who, if you want to make cities more democratic. And then I think it's not an uncommon experience that city dwellers experience alienation and antagonism. And I think it's something that for cities to be able to actually take responsibility for climate change, then this sort of alienation should be decreased. And also kind of make sure that there are avenues for more and relevant knowledge and expertise to enter into sort of deliberation, decision making on all different levels or in all different parts of the city. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, I only found out an hour ago that the name of the panel had to do with displacement, and I think that I didn't really think this through, but actually I thought it was a kind of a happy accident, because I understood that I need to think very carefully at what I'm going to propose from the perspective of displacement, because displacement, whether in the sense of within a city or people coming to the city from elsewhere, or whether people having to leave the city, losing their homes or otherwise becoming displaced, has impacts on how we think about decision making in this sort of mariological way, because there might be new parts or new cities and new processes or loss of them. And I think looking at how this sort of changes what I just said might actually be really, or how I have thought about cities and moral responsibility so far, that thinking about displacement very carefully would probably actually be very fruitful to it. But I'm not yet sure what I would say about that after I have thought about it a lot more. But I'll end here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Lauri. So we now start. We have some problem with other invitate, or they don't. Professor Rodrigo não tá, né? Não. The other professor is in Baku, right?
No.
Yes. And some trouble to access the internet. So we start the debate with some questions. So thank you so much again, Lauri, and all of audience. Thank you, the organization, for this panel, and thank you the presence here, our students for university. And so I have two questions to you, Professor Lauri, about your presentations. You're very exciting, and to make me think about some problems, some issues we have here in south of Brazil. We have in this year huge floods and huge problems with our infrastructure, and the cities in our state don't have capacity, don't have a budget, don't have make to respond to climate change and to engage in some different way to. So I don't imagine the cities, the mayors, the citizenship to engage new morality, to responsibility to do different things about climate change, because they are only engaged in survival and to make their lives to go on. So we have now in Brazil two types of morality, I believe, in climate change. We have the cities, and the people who live in the city have some morality about climate change and responsibility. And the people live in rural areas to production, and they are in some kind of irresponsible to make the change, the production more efficient and more sustainable. And in this event we have here in our state, the huge floods we have proved, our science, our university proved that the way we produce the soybean in the rural areas are directly linked to huge destruction of infrastructure. And this, how can I change this morality of the production in rural areas to export to China and like something like that? It's my. How can I work with this change of moralities? We live here in two moralities: the cities and the rural. One more responsible, I believe, and one more irresponsible with climate change and environment and sustainable. It's my first question.
Yeah. Thanks. That's a really interesting and important question. Yeah, I recognize this sort of urban-rural divide. That also in Finland there's a lot of talk about how people, especially in like big cities, big cities in a Finnish sense, so not very big cities for Brazilians maybe, but our cities are a bit smaller. It's a small country, but still how people in big cities think differently from people in the countryside or in smaller towns, especially in the north or eastern parts of Finland. And I think that is one question has to do with, I think, about a sort of experience, the everyday life of people and what sort of things they encounter in their daily life, and how also because you mentioned like production, is that what kind of things they produce and what their livelihood is like. So I think that's a big issue, and I'm not sure whether you can, how much it is possible to change morality without changing everyday life in some sense. But I think one important thing is to at least try to sort of try to understand the everyday situation of people who live in different kinds of places, so that we can have a dialogue about things that actually matter. But I think it's the question about how to change morality. It's a depressing question, because there's so much there's so much climate denialism, there's so much complacency. Myself, I'm not so much, I think, worried about rural areas, because I'm more worried about politicians or like big people with lots of power and influence who perhaps live in big cities, but who say that they speak for the poor in rural areas. And I think, and in Finland also, one of the really powerful groups is the lobbyists for the forestry industry. They have lots of power in how environmental politics plays out in Finland, and I think that's something that I am really sort of worried about. That not just that what is the thought of morality of people in different areas like, but what is the morality of those who claim that they speak for them, and that's something I'm sort of worried about. But I think your one thing in that's an interesting I think part of the problem, or an interesting detail, was that you said about soybeans affect how production of soybeans affects the environment. And the soybeans, of course, are in Finland, one of the big discussions besides forests is meat eating, because we know that so that we could have a kind of we could have ecologically sustainable societies, we would have to eat a lot less meat. And in Finland, some people will say that actually, do you know, because you know vegetarians is soybeans, so do you know the environmental impact of soybeans? Well, yeah, but do you know who eats most of the soybeans in Finland? Well, the cattle. so of course we could we could maybe produce other kinds of beans in Finland and not import soybeans for making tofu for vegans. But I think the main issue is that these issues are connected in kind of interesting ways. So there is a connection, I think, with both food industry and forestry industry between Finland and Brazil, and it's something I would really like to look into at some point. And then living in a city, we have this sort of we live sort of pretty far away from those impacts or those kind of sites of production, but then at some point we will see the impacts, and I think one part of being responsible in the age of climate change is to try to think very hard about these kind of connections that there are, so that you won't say things like, well, vegans eat soybeans. It's as if that was a kind of an argument at all. Yeah. But yeah, the main question was how to change morality, and then I think there is. I'm just looking at the comments. So there are some questions there, maybe as well. How to deal with that is that I think I cannot much. I don't really. Well, it's a big question, and the answer is I don't know. but I think the way I approach the question is that on the other hand, try to understand how people in different who live very different lives than I do, what is their life like? Why do they come to think the way they do? And then try to see if there is this kind of common ground in terms of very basic morality. Like we are all probably worried about the kind of future that our children will have. So that would be the first step, and the second step would be to try to be able to show how things that we take to be kind of pretty like normal everyday life, non-interesting things actually may be morally significant, and may even be sort of part of this what I called the expanded decision-making procedure of some collective. Sorry, it was a very long answer because you got me thinking about things.
How we can equalize this morality in smaller cities and big cities? Because we have some difference of collective engagement and collective compromise. We have small cities with huge effect of climate change. That's like some like our cities here. We have some cities with 1,000 people and the huge effect of climate change. Very problem. And big cities with little effect. I don't know if it's Shanghai. All cars are electric. All things. The compromise collective, it's working more than in the small cities. Well, how can I equalize this in some morality about the climate change? And it's I know you are from philosophy, so I provoke you in this things of questions, because we need to think this, because we share the same planet, we share the same environment, we share all, but we don't share a morality, a common morality to do these things. And you show us the importance of cities, and how can the cities have agency to do things, but the size of the cities affect how the agency works and how these things works. So how can we can equalize the size of the cities and the different ways to do, or to link it to moralities, to different moralities, to this collective compromise.
Yeah, I think that's another really good question. Well, two things come to mind. First is that I think not because when you just think about moral responsibility, then obviously we are, well, the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility thing, and there's obviously truth to that, because if you have sort of lots of influence, then you are responsible for a lot of things. But on the other hand, right now, I think we wouldn't want the richest people in the planet, even though they have lots of power and influence, to take responsibility in the sense of making decisions about our common future. And I think that's the sort of thing that I think that the theory of collective responsibility is not the best tool for answering that question. We can say that, okay, there's this sort of responsibility, but we don't want to say that, okay, these people should have the power that they have. So and that, I think, that comes back to the question of how can we democratize the world, or how can we equalize power, in the sense that, okay, then obviously responsibility would be more equalized if power is more equalized. And well, I think that's something that I don't have the sort of pragmatic answers for, but I think that's the sort of distinction that I would like to make, is simply that I can have a theory of collective moral responsibility, and that is obviously very much linked to questions about democracy, but that the collective responsibility doesn't give us a straightforward answers to questions of power, because those are separate questions, in the sense that we don't just don't just need to think about who is responsible for what, but also what kind of world do we want to live in, and we might want to live in a world where Elon Musk doesn't have all the power and all responsibility. I had another thought as well, but I kind of lost it. Sorry about that.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm open to our audience.
We have some questions. We have some questions in the YouTube chat. So some questions and some commentaries. Norma Valencia said, "Amazing presentation. Thanks, Professor Lauri." And I'm going to show this question first. What I wonder is how we in academia will manage to influence the fight against climate change and its damage, since this dialogue with decision makers seems so distant. Also, we have some questions from Arthur Reis. Aqui. So, how to enter in the political agenda with the environmental topic? Do you heard about the fact of the climate change in the south of Brazil, primarily in Rio Grande do Sul? We had new elections, and the results was not good for the environmental solutions. Basically, because the people that was in charge of office was the same that was elected, and how the environmental agenda enters in the political process, disasters, strategy, or economic causes. We have some more, but I guess you can start answer this, and then I will pass the others.
Yeah, those are really difficult and important questions, and I think I'm not sure if I'm sort of because I don't I haven't researched the things like the efficacy of political activism so much, although it's something that I'm or the sort of science policy interface issue, that how can we academics work but it's something I'm interested in, and I think those are really important questions. The way I would answer those is that from my perspective as a kind of researcher on responsibility is that the thing to start would be to kind of be able to think about one's own possibilities for having an impact in a kind of with some imagination and curiosity, and without assuming that we know what we actually can do. We might be able to do a lot of things that we don't know about, and that we should take our part as kind of moral agents, as some people who are able to think about things in a moral sense, and then making our decisions and maybe doing those things together with others seriously, and not just sort of say that, okay, the politicians are there and we are here, and that's that, because we might be able to do things that we haven't even imagined that we could do. But it's a sort of I think it's a kind of a learning process, and you have to start from where you are. And I think we can learn something about like from real life cases, like some young climate activists have been able to have a really big impact. There might be cases where things that I've been researching is about how like one really low level city professional, like an urban planner, might be able to have a really big impact for their own city, and then that impact might translate into something even more impactful one way or another. But I think it's just something that it's a kind of an open and important question, and I think one should just start from where you are and try to kind of understand one's own possibilities for action in a sort of or try to be curious about it. That's my kind of a bottom-up kind of way to think about that question.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Any more? You have? Okay. We have another.
I don't really mind, to be honest. Oh my god. Okay. This one is pretty far up. Okay. So I'll just stay here because. Okay. Hi, Lauri. I'm sorry
Hi.
for the delay and hello again. My question is just something to instigate, or as Professor Júlio said, to provoke you, because I would like to hear more about how do you visualize the challenges in other realities. I understand that in your presentation you shared your view in something that it is important and necessary to happen, and agents do require these informations to enhance their decision-making process. But how does this work in a reality where we face so many challenges, such as lobbying groups that are contrary to sustainable change, the public opinion that do change through the media and fake news? So how does these challenges affect the decision-making process, and how? And to be honest, what's your opinion on that? Because in most cases, people does not responsibilize the government for the climate problems we face. So the government does not share this morality or this responsibility to take on his lack of action. So I think we are facing some sort of issue that the government is aware of this, but does not change because the public opinion does not press it to change. So I know that there are some people that do change and do responsibilize the government, but as I said, in most cases, this does not happen. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I think I would respond to that in the sense that maybe say that your diagnosis of the situation is really spot on, and it's something that even though you are kind of making doing that diagnosis from the other side of the world, is something that I recognize in Finnish politics. It's absolutely true that that's pretty much the case. The lobbying groups, the irresponsible government, and so on. Our current government is particularly bad, to be honest. And maybe the way I would say is that I don't have a sort of pragmatic solution or something like what should we do about it kind of thing, but maybe more just say that I think what you said is important for my thinking about things like collective decision making, because it's things that you pointed out just show in what ways our decision-making procedures are really problematic. And one way that I like to do philosophy is what people like in critical theory call the negativistic method. So rather than having I didn't do that kind of stuff in this presentation, I've done it elsewhere, but the idea is that we shouldn't have these sort of just like armchair ideas about good politics or justice or democracy, but we should see how our current systems fail, and then say that the sort of normative ideas that we might like to have are informed by understanding of those failures. And what you just said is, I think, a really if we think about it, not just as it's not just a sort of list of problems. It's not just about a list of how our politics is going wrong. It's a diagnosis of our collective decision-making procedures, in which we also somehow take part, at least as voters, but also as possibly active citizens. So, and if we think about how, for example, the power of lobbying groups is, if we think about that says something important about how our current decision-making procedures are failing us, then we might maybe find some new ways to fight that problem.
We have another question here that is quite big, so I'm going to try to translate it bit by bit. Multi-sector partnership in this process. Once more actors participate in this process, they possibility that other cities become a central actor in this process. Oh, I forgot the first part. Professor, many cities have difficulties in implementing sustainable actions in their politics. These occur because of the low know-how of their agencies. And so in this case, you can observe the possibility that multi-sector partnerships in this process. Once more actors participate in this process, they can create that the cities as a central actor, as a central actor. More so, if seria this case would be a variable or even a necessary condition to development model in the local level. So, and Arthur said, "Thank you so much for your presentation."
Okay, thank you. That's a complex question. But I think so. So the problem would be the low know-how of agents in cities, and then the sort of multi-sectoral partnerships as a kind of enabling cities to take more central role, and would this be a condition for the cities? So yeah, I think so. Yes. So if I understood the question, well, I think the multi-sectoral one issue is sort of multi-sectoral, like working together with people from various sectors and kind of going out of getting rid of silos. This is a necessary part, I think. Another part that I found in my sort of that besides this sort of armchair philosophy, I've also been doing some empirical research in like with and discussed these issues a lot with people who work in the municipal organization. And I think one thing that I found was that people who know best or have the best know-how about climate change, whether about mitigation or possible impacts to cities, tend to be and this is in Finland, so other places might be different, but in Finnish cities and towns, people who have the best expertise about climate change tend to be at the sort of peripheries of the municipal organization. So they might be like precarious workers, young people, maybe young mothers who miss meetings because they have childcare duties and so on. And then where the most power of the city organization is when is when like men in suits talk about the city budget, and they have tended not to listen to people who have the most expertise about climate change. So I think one issue is multi-sectoral partnership, but I think another important thing is also to sort of equalize the city organization in the sense, or just even if not equalize, just make it like a proper so that people who have actually expertise about important issues get a place in the table where decisions are made. So that would be just a sort of city organization level issue. And then maybe the third part would be to think about how know-how about climate change and solution could travel kind of throughout the city, in addition to the city organization. Thank you. It's an important question.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Lauri. So we can end our session now. Thank you so much, and thank you for
Thank
audience. It's up
Thank
to
you for your questions.
Bom, agradecemos ao professor Lauri pela maravilhosa palestra, agradecer ao professor Júlio pelo debate e a todos que participaram nas perguntas, né, que ajudaram na construção do debate. E com isso encerramos essa palestra. Desejamos que os conhecimentos aqui discutidos inspirem novas ações e debates em prol de uma sociedade mais justa e resiliente. Repassamos que a partir das 13 horas estaremos fazendo credenciamento no hall da entrada do prédio 74C, para aqueles que ainda não fizeram. Temos oficina de pós-graduação com o professor Samuel Soares, os painéis de apresentação de trabalho e a apresentação, o encerramento, happy hour do evento com o lançamento dos livros da professora Mariana Celister e o professor Diego Baltasso, hoje às 19 horas no Mamaquila. As informações mais precisas serão repassadas no grupo de avisos e estamos à disposição frente a eventuais esclarecimentos. Boa tarde a todos.